All our songs will be silenced. But what of it? Go on singing. Maybe a man's name doesn't matter all that much.
We know a remote farm in Lincolnshire where Mrs. Buckley lives. Every July, peas grow there. Do you really mean that?
Hello again, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, and today we're looking at Disney Animation's The Aristocats from 1970, or as I like to call it, the What Would Walt Do era, the revamp era for short. This script was written by Lewis.
I do, however, have a head. It's attached to my body, it is me.
So thank you, Lewis.
It'll still be me.
If you're new here, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many, and if you're returning, I thank you once again for your continued patronage. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. Allons-y. First off, I want to just talk a little bit about how this was, at a certain point in my life, my favorite movie in the world. I think until probably Monsters, Inc. came out in 2001, and that became my obsession when I was about however many years old. But I adored Aristocats when I was a really wee lad, when I was under the age of a certain age. So this was my first ever favorite movie. The Aristocats was my first ever favorite film. And then it went to Monsters, Inc. And then it went to when Pirates of the Caribbean came out in 2003. Curse of the Black Pearl, that became my favorite film when I was, again, however many years old. And that was the progression up until another film came out in 2005 that's been my favorite film ever since. But I'll leave that to be a secret for... Maybe eventually I'll make a full video essay on my favorite film, personally. However, I don't want to bore you too much with this, but The Aristocats was, when I was a certain age, just my favorite movie in the world. I was obsessed with it. I would watch it over and over and over. It was very, very special to me. It was the first movie ever that I would have called my favorite, my favorite film. It was just... My appreciation of movies begins with The Aristocats, in a way. And so, for that reason, it holds a very special place in my heart. And it is in my top 10 favorite Disney movies ever, my sort of subjective list of favorites. I have an objective list of how good I think the quality of the Disney films is, and that's the rating I give at the end of these videos. That number out of 10 is how I rank them on my objective list, but in my subjective favorites rank, Aristocats is and always will be top 10. It's hard to say what appealed to me so much about it when I was a kid, but I mean, I've always loved cats. My family always had cats growing up, so I'm very fond of the animals. I have dogs now, but I didn't until I was an adult. And yeah, I've always had a fascination with them. Tigers have always been my favorite animal, and that's just a big cat. So it's something very close to me. Like, the form of the animal physically is so beautifully designed by nature. The way that they move is so incredible, and that's captured so well in this film, as I'll talk about in the animation section. And just the characters, it's these characters I fell in love with. I fell in love with the love story. This movie is, I think, what probably made me a fan of romances in general, and I'm still a fan of romances. I'm a huge fan of romance in media, and so I just adore the feeling of this film. I love France. I've been to France many times. I speak a little bit of French. I mean, you can't escape that living in the country that I live in, but it's just what a vibe this movie is. Before I even get into the production history, as I always do, I just wanted to expound a little bit on my personal love for this film and my history with it. And so even though it was, before my time in terms of its release, I was not alive in 1970, it's just, there is something about it that is so special. And it's the last movie, as I'll get into in a minute, that was sort of, started primarily in the Walt era, or one of the last couple, Robin Hood somewhat as well. But really, this is the last movie that kind of Walt knew what it was going to be specifically, and they were carrying it forward, but he had approved the idea. We're going to get into it, but it's just got a little bit of that Walt magic left sprinkled into it, and it's all of these animators who sort of are so emotional after the death of their leader and father figure to a lot of them, literally. It's it's an ode to charm, it's an ode to class, it's an ode to sophistication, it's an ode to good behavior and bad behavior. This movie has a lot on its mind, and I'll get into that in the thoughts and themes at the end, but I just love it. It's French and American in the best ways possible, Anyway, let's get into the production history. I don't know how much of that, history of me in the film I'll cut, but we'll see how much you guys get to see of that. I talked for a while.
Well, anyway.
This film's production began its life when, in early December 1961, Walt Disney assigned to two of his staff writers, Harry Teitel and Tom McGowan, the task of finding some stories featuring animals to work into an eventual two-part live-action adventure program for Disney's, at the time, very popular The Wonderful World of Color TV series. By the end of the year, McGowan had found 3 stories he felt would be suitable, including among them a story by an American author called Tom Rowe about a mother cat protecting her little kittens, all set in New York City. However, Teitel felt that, similar to the London setting of 101 Dalmatians, making that dog-centric story feel more exotic to American audiences, this cat-centered story should also have a fun, continental, more European flavor to it, and his suggestion that the story be set primarily in and around Paris was accepted pretty much straight away. This made even more sense when you consider that Rowe, the original author of the story, who had now joined McGowan and Teitel in further developing this story, was actually living in Paris when he had written it. Interestingly enough, Disney Animation would in fact get around to producing a film about a cat in New York City in 1988 with Oliver and Company, so even if it was around 18 years later than they had originally planned, they did get to make a movie around the idea of a pack of animals having to survive in the Big Apple, after all. This was quite an unusual origin story for a Disney animation feature, as I have noted in several previous videos leading up to this one. With the notable exception of 101 Dalmatians, Walt Disney essentially always opted to produce classic literature and traditional fairy tales in his full-length movies, stories that he himself had personally grown up with in Missouri around the turn of the century. The Aristocats, then, being the last animated feature film personally approved by the big man before his passing, and only the second newer piece of media to be adapted after Dalmatians, marked yet another step outside of his and the studio's comfort zone, right at the end of his life. Using one of his final official decisions with the company to signal to the remaining Disney staff going forward that it was all right with him for them to expand their storytelling horizons into more entirely original storylines in future full-length animated films.
Do it! Just do it!
Anyway, Teitel felt so strongly about the potential of this mother cat and kittens story that in August of 1963, He told Walt he thought it could be its own fully produced animated feature, rather than a live-action TV broadcast, and Walt told him to take the idea to Wolfgang Reitherman. Reitherman, who was at the time directing the massive rewrite of the Jungle Book after the departure of longtime storyman Bill Peet, thought that the Cats in Paris idea had definite legs, and agreed with Title and Walt that it could and should be its own theatrically released animation. However, since the animation division was all in on the Jungle Book when they made this decision, they decided to shelve the project for the time being, until the Jungle Book was close to completion. Eventually, the delay went on long enough that Title left the project to go back to developing live-action ideas. At long last, in 1966, as the production of the Jungle Book seemed to be nearing its end, Walt decided to give the legendary Ken Anderson a crack at the Cats. This story went through several versions of edits before it was shelved, from the Tom Rowe original that McGowan had found, to ideas from Title and McGowan, and eventually Title replacement Winston Hibbler, to input from Walt Disney himself, as well as assigned story artist Otto Englander. When it was, at long last, assigned by Walt to the steady hand of Ken Anderson to finalize, with much input from Reitherman, who would once again direct, Anderson had two main storylines to condense into one. The first was, of course, the plot of the mother cat and her kittens, 4 originally, but later winnowed down to 3 kittens, on the suggestion of Walt himself. The second plotline revolved around a butler named Edgar and a maid named Elvira, who would conspire in several failed joint efforts to off the cats of their wealthy, elderly dowager employer, thus leaving the old woman's vast fortune to them upon her passing. To further trim the fat and focus the story more on the animals, Elvira the maid was cut, leaving Edgar as the sole villain, and the animal adventure was given the lion's share of the runtime, with their journey turning into more of a directly 101 Dalmatians-inspired road trip story, with Ken Anderson shaping the visual and personal features of the characters to fit the voice actors playing them, much like they had done, again, with the main cast of the Jungle Book. Therefore, fresh off his work as Baloo in that film, Phil Harris was brought right back again by Walt personally for a second time, this go-around to voice the charming as all get-out tabby cat that Duchess and her kittens meet along the way, Thomas O'Malley. To star opposite Phil, the classy, slinky, sensual Hungarian socialite and actress Eva Gabor was cast in the role of Duchess, and the white cat was similarly patterned off the lovely lady. Louis Armstrong was sought out for a second film in a row, and once again did not appear, as originally envisioned, due to illness in this case, this time instead being replaced not by Louis Prima, but by Scatman Crothers, who was directed to perform the character as if he were doing an Armstrong impression. Literally, they told him, just sound like Louis, do your best.
Just do it!
The approval of this film for a full theatrical treatment and release, as well as the hiring of Phil Harris to play Thomas, were two of the last decisions that Walt Disney ever made as the head of Disney Animation. For just a short while later, in December 1966, he would pass away from throat cancer.
Goodbye.
This left newly appointed head of animation, Wolfgang Reitherman, and the rest of the Disney Animation staff to finish up the remainder of the Jungle Book and to go forward into the end of the 1960s and beginning of the 70s with the Aristocats as the bridge production between the Walt and post-Walt eras, a transition film, something that was approved by the big man before his passing, but that would have to be mostly developed and ultimately completed without any more of his input at all. This once again left Disney Animation somewhat hanging in the balance. The Jungle Book had been a smash hit and served as the swan song for and goodbye to Walt Disney that the old man had always deserved. But now that was over, and it was up to Wolfie and the remaining boys and girls to come up with yet another big hit to justify their jobs. While they all would obviously have preferred that Walt could still be around for this and many more films to come, the remaining producers, writers, and animators all did a pretty splendid job on this production, at doing about what they thought Walt would have wanted them to do, and that's why I usually like to refer to this next period for Disney, the 1970s, as the What Would Walt Do era, and the Revamp era, because this was the time when they sort of took a few years to recollect and reconsider and put their house in order before they entered into a very dark period of storytelling with a very different animation staff in the 1980s. And anybody who tells you that the 70s and 80s are one era and it's the Bronze Age and it's all one is full of crap and doesn't really know much about Disney history, in my opinion. But I mean, it's just the popular view. But I think that the 70s and the 80s are two very distinct, differently characterized eras. Anyway, including the once again directing and now newly appointed head of the animation division, Wolfgang Reitherman, 5 of Disney's 9 old men worked on this film, and you can really see and feel the skill and experience on display. This is such muscle memory at this point for these indescribably talented and veteran artists. The characters, movements, and colors flowing so naturally and effortlessly from the collective animations of these filmmakers. There's some real flexing going on here in the character movements, the way the humans are doing their funny business. Like George and Edgar on the stairs is a scene in particular, and George dancing with Madame. Really, any scene with George moving around is just such a flex by the animators, because that dude is crazy to look at. The way he, his general physicality, it's so chaotic. And so this is simultaneously probably the very scratchiest film visually with the xerography of any of the Disney films in this period. It's the most sort of cluttered with the sketch lines, but at the same time, I think that again, another film in a row really, really works for me. I love xerography. I'm finding I love the look of xerography, and I never realized that before. But I'm a xerography stan. I love this look. I love just different forms of 2D animation, and I think it's a gorgeous, gorgeous aesthetic. So, especially in this film, because it is a top 10 favorite movie for me. But all of the xerography era, the scratchy era, is just I love it. I love these animated films in terms of their look. They're just beautiful. What can I say? I agree with Milt Kahl. The sketches should be on the screen. Milt Kahl had a point.
I love the way you make them!
Anyway, as I said, there was a lot riding on the success of this film, and they all knew it. The Jungle Book had been the proof that they could successfully finish and release a movie without their beloved founder, but the Aristocats would be the ultimate test to see if they could actually fully create a brand new hit Disney animation feature film all on their own Waltless steam. And once more, just like The Jungle Book, a very big hit for Disney, the Aristocats ultimately was. On a production budget of only $4 million, still well over $1 million less than Sleeping Beauty had cost over a decade earlier, the Aristocats grossed $28 million worldwide in its initial theatrical run, lasting from 1970 to about 1972 or 3, because back then movies opened way later and ran for way longer because there were just less movies produced. But anyway, $28 million in its initial theatrical run on a $4 million budget. Over 7 times its budget. And once more breaking the all-time record for an animated film in its initial theatrical run that Jungle Book had set just a few years earlier with like 24 plus, and including being the top movie of the French box office in 1971, where it remains to this day one of the 20 most successful films in the French movie market ever. France in general has historically had quite a love affair with Disney animation at the box office, as a full 8 out of their top 27 movies at the all-time box office are all Disney animation features. And the Aristocats isn't actually even in the top 3 or even 4 of that 8. Like, there's a bunch of movies beyond this one that have done even better there. I think probably, The Lion King, obvious, but there's a couple others too. It's just crazy how successful Disney has been in France over the years. So it makes sense that this one did well, but this one didn't even do, number 1, even though it is the French Disney movie. Anyway, it was, in fact, the 3rd out of Disney's last 4 releases to set a new all-time record for animation at the box office after The Jungle Book and 101 Dalmatians before it, which kind of puts in perspective how much of a failure Walt considered The Sword in the Stone, because even though it had okay reviews and did make money at the box office, it didn't set a new record, and that's what they've been doing every time around that time. So, I get it. He wanted a big hit. As well as being a mega hit financially, this film was also fairly well received critically, although a fair bit less heartily than The Jungle Book had been. While it was mostly celebrated overall as yet another charming, adorable, cute animal-filled entry into the now growing collection of Disney cartoon adventures, there were many critics who felt that this was a far weaker entry into the canon than most, with several arguing that it lacked a certain magical spark, didn't feature enough music, and on the whole looked and felt a bit cheaper than the classic Disney animation of old. And of course, there's just always going to be some people who say, well, it didn't have that Walt magic. This criticism of a cheap look would only continue on with the rest of their productions throughout the 1970s, as the remaining artists continued to try to figure out just where exactly this ship was headed, now that its original captain had left it for good. Certainly a trend that would continue from this point on is even more animal-centric films, as The Jungle Book and then The Aristocats were the first 2 of 6 straight Disney films to focus primarily on animal lead characters, up until The Black Cauldron would finally break this streak in 1985. As a final side note in the introduction, I watched this with my mom when I was originally beginning the writing of this review, and it was her first time fully seeing the whole movie, back to front, beginning to end, and she loved it. She thought it was fantastic. She's, in general, a pretty big fan of classic Disney. She loves a lot of the older movies, and she loves a lot of the Renaissance, and she even likes stuff like Tangled a lot, and Princess and the Frog, I believe. She's seen Moana, too, because her granddaughter, my niece, adores Moana. Well, I know she's seen it, but I think she likes it, too. But she loved Aristocats. I think she'd put it very, very high if she had to rank them. But I just thought that was cool that my mom hadn't seen it until the age she is now, and she loved it. 6 of the 9 old men would play large parts in bringing this film to life, but 3 of them had already retired, and the rest of these 6 would slowly drop off from the company throughout the 1970s and into the early 1980s. With all of these practiced old hands retiring, finally, Eric Larson took it upon himself to be the elder statesman artist of Disney, training the new young artists that were hired throughout this next period and instilling into them the wisdom of the old guard. He ended up working with and training many of the artists that would eventually contribute to the success of the Disney Renaissance. But that's a story that we'll be getting to in just a few months' time. This film, as well as being very similar in a story sense to 101 Dalmatians, also feels quite of a piece with Lady and the Tramp in terms of its story building, and specifically in its usage of stereotypes. Just as in that film, almost every single character in this story is a caricature or stereotype of some kind, be it racial, cultural, or simply of a certain personality type. There is Madame, the quintessential, classy old Frenchwoman of high society, with a great and storied history of past friends and lovers to look back upon with nostalgia and joy. There is Georges, her lawyer, the goofy, romantic, young-at-heart old Frenchman without an inhibition in the world. Edgar, the frustrated, put-upon butler with nefarious intentions, pulling strings from the shadows. Duchess, the sleek, exotic, exceedingly feminine Angora mother cat, and her 3 quixotic children, each of them representing a different side of kittenhood. Marie, the aloof lady in training, Toulouse, the artistic firebrand, and Berlioz, the mischievous musician. There's the two dogs, Napoleon and Lafayette, meant to evoke Southern Americans and their often comically laid-back reactions to otherwise serious situations. There are even the geese, Amelia, Abigail, and their beloved Uncle Waldo, who all together as a trio represent the stiff upper lip attitude and casually functional alcoholism of early 20th century England.
I can't believe how drunk you are.
I am not drunk.
And finally there is Thomas O'Malley and all of his friends, the entire gang of cool alley cats. Thomas himself is of course a riff on the classic wandering rogue persona, a handsome, swashbuckling charmer that is just as much a precursor to the likes of Flynn Rider as he is a direct follow-up to Baloo the Bear. Thomas O'Malley represents the literary wandering man, in search of a home and a family to belong to at last, but content in his wanderings for the time being. His gang of cat friends, then, represents the rest of the movie's trope-heavy style to the extreme, as each of them represents a different, fairly specific, cultural stereotype. Shun Gon, the Chinese cat, is the most controversial of these caricature characters due to this moment in the song.
Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Fuyang. Fortune cookie always wrong. That's a hard one.
Peppo, the Italian cat, and Billy Boss, the Russian cat, are less broadly portrayed stereotypes than Shun Gon, but still hit on very specific, tropey aspects of their cultures that would have translated very directly for 1970 Americans. Hit Cat is the English stereotype, and he specifically evokes British invasion musicians of the 1960s, such as the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and David Bowie, what with his accent, long hair, demeanor, and groovy hippie glasses. Finally, the leader of the gang, Scat Cat himself, is meant to specifically represent an African American, both by being played by an actual black American in Scatman Crothers himself, as well as evoking a different, even more famous and culturally recognizable one, Louis Armstrong, through a loving vocal impression. Just as in Lady and the Tramp, these usages of caricature and stereotype are consistently sprinkled throughout the entire movie to create a cohesive sense of the wacky and unpredictable world these characters inhabit. And again, like in Lady and the Tramp, because everyone is a cultural stereotype of some kind or another, it ends up making the more extreme caricatures feel a lot less mean-spirited than they might have in isolation. While the Disney staff may have gone a little bit too far with Shun Gon specifically, he is still never depicted as anything less than a full-fledged, beloved, important, perfectly intelligent, and totally equal member of the international friend group of cats. He's silly, but he knows he's silly, and he enjoys that fact, and so he never comes off seeming stupid or entirely the butt of the joke. The other cats are laughing with Shun Gon, not at him, and thus, ultimately, so are we, the audience. And I also don't know where the name Shun Gon comes from. I'm sure it's not a real Chinese name of any kind. I gotta look that up. Watch it be real, and then I look like an idiot, but I bet it's not. In short, while the exaggerated moments in the Aristocats, like those associated with said Chinese cat, aren't what you might see coming from the Disney of today, I, for one, think the character works just fine in the proper context of all the other similarly stereotypically constructed felines surrounding him, and as for the stereotypes in the movie, I once again think they just work really well, and work about as well as all of the ones in Lady and the Tramp and all the ones in 101 Dalmatians, although 101 Dalmatians is definitely the least stereotype heavy of those three, but still, it's there with all the different types of British Isles sort of animals and dialects you hear in that one, but especially in Tramp and this film. There's just stereotypes aplenty, and I think they're really fun. It's kind of like South Park. When you make fun of everyone, it feels fair.
But such behavior is most unbecoming to a lovely gentleman.
Duchess in this film is, to me, one of the most quintessentially charming characters in all of fiction. She's a wonderful mother to her 3 kittens in literally every instance, teaching them, guiding them, caring for them, keeping them safe, and showing them how to navigate the outside world in a careful and respectful manner. Her voice, the ephemeral purr of Eva Gabor, could not possibly be more perfectly suited to the design it is matched with, a visual design that has become quite iconic in its own right. Duchess is gorgeously imagined in every single moment, and is the only cat in this film to sometimes have visible irises within her eyes, as you can see her distinctly blue ones in certain close-up shots, whereas all of the other cats have eyes that are simply black pupils inside another solid color. You can see this especially well in the shot where Thomas O'Malley says that her eyes really are like sapphires. Her body is perfectly proportioned and moves as gracefully and silkily as any real cat you've ever seen. Her necklace is a perfect, final, specific individual visual feature to give her, and her wonderfully coy and playful facial expressions directly translate the gorgeous tones of Gabor's tremendously likable vocal performance. Eva Gabor was a Hungarian immigrant who, along with her 2 sisters, Magda and Jaja, became quickly embedded into American high society as well as into Hollywood, charming the power brokers and audiences of the United States in equal measure, with both their incredible beauty as well as their tremendous wits, not to mention those exotic, intoxicating Hungarian accents. Eva and Jaja were the actresses, Eva transitioning from more film work in the 1950s into more television work in the 1960s on shows like Green Acres, before finally giving the world of voice acting a try in this film. She would, of course, do such tremendous work as Duchess, be so beloved by the Disney staff, and enjoy the process of making this film so much that she would return twice more to Disney Animation, both times voicing the equally wonderful Bianca in the Rescuers duology. So we will be checking back in with Eva in this series of reviews quite soon. She and Phil Harris, who voices Thomas O'Malley, both appeared in 3 Disney animation films apiece, and they play the lovers in this one. She rather reminds me of a European version of Mary Costa when speaking, as both Duchess and Bianca remind me quite a bit of the cool, calm, and serenely collected energy of Sleeping Beauty in the ladylike ways that they conduct themselves, as well as the retiring yet joyful softness of their speaking voices. As for Duchess herself, she truly is one of Disney's greatest and most selfless mothers, as she, like Perdita before her and Kala after her, does absolutely everything in her power to protect her children from any and all dangers coming their way, and ultimately, just like those 2, succeeding. However, that's not all she is, and I adore that this film gives us so many sides of Duchess. The mother to her kittens, the daughter to Madame, the lover to Thomas, the friend to Scat Cat and the gang. She truly is a presence to be reckoned with, a breath of fresh air into any environment she enters, and her song to the other cats is to me one of the sweetest and loveliest scenes in the film. A second to just slow down and enjoy the timeless beauty of something. In this case, a gorgeous and charming woman portraying an equally sleek and charming cat.
And blow a little soul into the tube.
Her romance with Thomas is one of my favorites in all the Disney canon, and their moment atop the roofs of Paris, entangling their tails as her 3 kittens look on in wonderment, is one of the most beautiful and emotionally complex scenes in any Disney animation film. I'm sure I'll touch on it much more later in the story section, but it's a great one. Thomas' struggle with his own issues of commitment in the face of his growing love for Duchess and the kittens is so perfectly conveyed here, as is Duchess' growing affection for and quiet dependence on the wandering rogue. They aren't quite at the end of their journey yet, but at least for a little while, Thomas feels like everything will be all right because he is with her, and she feels the same because she is with him. Yes, a wonderful character, a wonderful actress, and I'll talk a lot more about sort of her design in the animation section and how iconic it's become in a certain way, but she's just a standout Disney lead character, in my opinion, is Duchess. I adore her. If I were to ever rank the Disney cats, she might be number one. But moving on to her children.
Wait for me! Wait for me! Me first! Me first! Oh, why should you be first?
The kittens are another one of the great Disney trios of characters, up there with the likes of the three good fairies and the three caballeros. Just like those two trios before them, they are all nicely delineated by each of their own unique colorings, as well as their vastly different personalities, making their group dynamic an utter joy on screen, as well as feeling quite true to life to a real-world group of three kitten siblings. On an individual level, they are also each wonderful in their own rights. All three of them are very much consciously designed as mini-versions, visually, of three of the grown-up cat characters in the story. Toulouse, the ginger kitten, is very much modeled after the orange tomcat Thomas O'Malley, and he goes on to idolize Thomas when he enters the narrative. The same goes for Berlioz, who is patterned after and also falls in love with the wonderful black scat cat, both Berlioz and his older doppelganger being musicians. And of course, Marie is made to be a tiny version of her own mother, the white Angora Duchess, and from the beginning of the story, we can see that Marie both idolizes and takes after her mother as much as she possibly can. Toulouse is named for the French painter, from whom he also inherited his love for painting. Berlioz is named for the French composer and similarly was given a corresponding love of music, and Marie was named for the beheaded French queen Marie Antoinette, from whom she takes her high-minded air of haughty sophistication. On the topic of the painting, I really love the way Toulouse gets paint all over himself when he paints, and how they get paint all over the piano as well. That's just such an adorable scene. I love the colors getting everywhere. You can tell the animators were having so much fun, and it's a little bit of a throwback to the fairies fighting in Sleeping Beauty with the colors going all over the place in the dress and all sorts of things. And so, yeah, just colors being thrown is a really fun visual thing in animation, and they do it perfectly in the paint scene.
Yeah.
I also really love the adornments for each kitten, with Marie getting a large bow around her neck, as well as a smaller one around a tuft of fur at the top of her head, and both of her brothers getting differently shaped and colored bow ties. I'll talk a little bit more in the animation section about the importance, symbolically, of the neckwear of the cats in this film. The kittens play a marvelous role throughout the narrative. Part main characters, part damsels in distress to be saved and protected, part audience point of view stand-ins, such as in the scene when they watch their mother and Thomas O'Malley fall in love on the roof. Whatever role the story asks them to play, they play it to perfection, and are always adorable while doing it, but never crossing so far into cutesy territory that they become insufferable. They're a marvelous cat counterpart to the dozens and dozens of puppies portrayed in 101 Dalmatians, and you can truly feel the love with which the animators brought them to life in every single awkward yet endearing little movement they make. Gary Dubin, Dean Clark, and Liz English all did absolutely excellent voice work in these roles, some of my favorite child voice acting in every Disney movie, and they all have excellent chemistry with their adult co-stars. Overall, while the kittens could have easily become an overly sympathetic, even cloyingly sweet and saccharine element of the film if more poorly handled, they were instead so consistently excellently portrayed, with more than enough edge, sass, and personality to spare, that they ended up turning out to be one of this movie's greatest and most enduring strengths.
I've got that wanderlust, gotta walk the scene.
There is an eternal, borderline ethereal quality to me within the character of Thomas O'Malley, the alley cat. What I mean by that is, he feels like a character that has always existed, in some sense, within the fabric of reality, just waiting patiently for his creators to bring him into full existence before our very eyes. He is the perfect distillation of a happy-go-lucky, wandering vagabond, an honorable hobo without a care in the world, tied down to nowhere and no one, continuing on his path in life somewhat akin to a force of nature.
There's only one beau that's got the stuff to try me.
Thomas, until he meets Duchess and the kittens, wants for nothing. He's a bit like the Disney version of Tom Bombadil. He simply is.
Tom is the earth kind of bounding along, so there's something primal about them.
And even similar to Tom Bombadil, if you know The Lord of the Rings, Thomas arrives with a song. Very much with a song.
O'Malley the alley cat.
I would say that this puts him in somewhat of a contrast to Tramp, the character that he is most similar to within the Disney canon that is not also just voiced by Phil Harris. Tramp, even in his earliest scenes, feels somewhat lonely, cast aside by society and searching for something, someone, anything to latch onto for a greater meaning. He may not be aware of this fact himself, but it seems clear to me that Tramp is not nearly as content on his own as he at first makes out. Thomas, on the other hand, seems perfectly at peace with the world and his place in it, wandering the French countryside and singing a jaunty tune, without a worry or care in sight. Both Tramp and Thomas develop relationships with their female counterparts and are, by the ends of their stories, the paternal piece of a larger family, but this storyline saves Tramp much more than Thomas. Tramp is, after all, still a fairly young dog, fighting for his place in a rough city environment, whereas Thomas is a cat of the world, roaming the hills with ease, with a whole network of friends in the city, if he chooses to visit. However, for all their differences, Tramp and Thomas represent many of the same values within their character arcs, chiefly that true and lasting meaning is to be found by being there for others, rather than just always being there for yourself. These two also engage in two of Disney's all-time greatest romances, and I find the subtly intimate interplay between Duchess and Thomas just as adorable and enrapturing as the earlier dynamic between Lady and Tramp. Duchess, too, is obviously much older than the youthful Lady, having 3 kittens and a former partner under her belt by the time she meets Thomas, and being fully aware of what a cat like him might turn out to be like. However, she takes a leap of faith on the ginger charmer, trusting that he is, after all, as true of heart as she hopes him to be, and he, in turn, rewards her faith in every way imaginable. The story of this film is that of a family finding its true form at last, of 2 lost romantic souls who were destined to meet someday, finally being brought together through somewhat less than ideal circumstances. Thomas falls in love with Duchess and the kittens, just as we have before him, and they all fall in love with him right alongside us, too. As mentioned in the introduction, Phil Harris was once again courted personally by Walt Disney for the role, and once more accepted, though this time with less trepidation than he had had when considering the role of Baloo the Bear. To differentiate the character from Baloo as much as possible while still keeping Harris' signature vocal charms intact, Wolfgang Reitherman directed Harris to base O'Malley much more on the screen persona of a handsome smooth talker like Clark Gable, in sharp contrast to Baloo, who had been partially inspired by the on-screen presence of Wallace Beery. I have a note in here to, if you please, explain who T.F. Wallace Beery is to the folks at home. Yeah, Wallace Beery is not an actor that I'm personally super familiar with, but he was a really big deal back in the 1930s and 40s. He actually won a Best Actor for a dramatic role of his in maybe 1931 or something. I believe he had one of the only ever ties for an Oscar, and he won tie Best Actor one year. If I'm wrong, sue me, but I'm pretty sure he did. And it was it was a movie about like a wrestler or something, but it was some sort of weepy drama from the time. I've never seen it, but he was like a really big name at the time. He's in, lots of caricature sort of collections, cartoons of the time with cameos from sort of luminaries of the Hollywood scene from the 30s and 40s. And so he's actually referenced a bunch in the Coen brothers movie Barton Fink. I believe that the main character is contracted to write a Wallace Beery picture. I think they call him Wally Beery, but yeah, he was a real guy. But if you've ever seen that movie, that character, if you didn't know, was a real person, although you probably did. Wallace Beery was an interesting person, and he was a big sort of cultural touchstone back then that we've just kind of completely forgotten about in the modern age. Nobody really knows who Wallace Beery was above a certain age. I kind of do through historical context, but even I haven't really seen any of his movies. But I kind of, from Baloo at least, I can kind of see the screen persona being portrayed, and I certainly know a little bit more about Clark Gable than I can see the Clark Gable in Thomas O'Malley. So it's just really interesting, the sort of the personalities that they were drawing from back then, and now the personalities that we would be drawing from would be more likely to be the characters that Phil Harris was playing in Disney movies rather than the people that he was basing those characters off of. So it's just so interesting how so many things change and so many things stay the same. Through the roles of Baloo in The Jungle Book, Thomas O'Malley in this film, and ending with Little John in our next entry, 1973's Robin Hood, Phil established himself as possibly the greatest supporting voice actor in Disney animation history, effortlessly breathing real and warm life into three equally marvelous characters in three straight, equally wonderful films. Harris is a massive element of what makes each of these movies special, indeed of what makes them even work at all in the first place. His voice, his delivery, his comedic timing, his sheer, overwhelming amount of pure, unadulterated charm. Everything about this man and the characters he played gives you only the warmest and fuzziest feelings to hear and to watch. And I am always excited to get to listen to Phil Harris again every single time I fire up one of these three movies.
A lot of people use the spoon, but you don't get enough that way. I don't know whether to iron now or put it on like it is.
Yes, sure.
Throughout my research into the canon and my listening to and reading of many, many, many rankings and reviews of all their animated films, I have found Edgar to be one of the most consistently disliked and generally slagged off villains in a Disney movie. He's often described as boring, uninteresting, pathetic, useless, creepy, lacking in a song or any key-specific, memorably villainous feature, or otherwise just not to that viewer's taste as a Disney villain goes. To be quite honest, I couldn't disagree more with these critiques. Oh, we love a hot take. We really love a hot take on this channel. Now, I'm not actually that controversial, but this was, one I want to champion. While Edgar is far from my absolute favorite big bad of all time, actually I'm going to do a ranking of the villains eventually, pretty soon, I view those specified aspects of him in a far more favorable light than most tend to. For one thing, while I adore Disney villain songs on the whole, I don't think that it would have fit Edgar very well to have one of his own. He's a more subtle sort of dastardly, the kind of bad person who plans their wrongdoing in little private moments when they know they're alone, not in big, colorful, jazzy musical sequences. I think that there was going to be a song, like a duet between him and Elvira, when Elvira the maid was still part of this movie. If I'm not mistaken, they did have a song planned for them, but it was cut when Elvira was cut. There are several great songs in this film. In fact, I'd say that every song in this film is great, but I'm honestly glad Edgar doesn't have one. As to the boring and uninteresting comments, this is a bit more on the personal taste side of things, but I, for one, do not find Edgar uninteresting in the slightest. I adore seeing a willing but naturally bumbling bad guy try over and over to get his escapades to go as planned, only for his lack of foresight or generally bad nature to inevitably get in his way and foul up all of his efforts. His feud with the two dogs is my absolute favorite part of his time on screen, as the two southern canines provide a hilarious balance and a physical obstacle to the tenacious but timid butler. As for the pathetic and creepy claims, to those I would say, isn't the point of a character like Edgar to be just that, pathetic and creepy? While he isn't the ranting, raving, constantly raging ball of fury that Cruella de Vil is, Edgar is no less evil than that far more popular villain. At the end of the day, while their presentation is wildly different, as are their places in pop culture, Cruella and Edgar's goals are exactly the same. To kill several adorable, defenseless little animals, solely for their own personal gains. He is much more similar in tone and portrayal to villains like Prince John in Robin Hood, or Bowler Hat Guy in Meet the Robinsons, or even kind of to the villain of, I shouldn't spoil it, but kind of similar to the villain of Zootopia 2, but I'm not going to say who that is in case you haven't seen it yet. And I think he performs his particular function in this story perfectly. I love that his plans keep getting fouled up, but he keeps trying new things. Like, he's tenacious if nothing else. Like, he keeps getting in his own way. You know, he messes up with the dogs. He brags about his plans in the stable, which lets Frou-Frou and Roquefort know his plans, but also, you know, he just keeps trying and keeps trying and keeps doing things, and he very nearly wins over and over and over, and only by the grace and efforts of many, many animals is he defeated, just because he's a human, and humans can do so many things physically, and they're so smart and devious. But yeah, I think he's a fun villain who kind of perfectly matches the low stakes of this movie. It's nice to have just a completely normal person be the bad guy sometimes. Oh, he's also a precursor to Lawrence. Definitely Lawrence from Princess and the Frog. While I'm on the subject of dastardly butlers, definitely Lawrence is a follow-up to Edgar for sure. He's just likable enough that you totally understand the cat's fondness for him at the beginning and disbelief in his betrayal, but he's also just unsettling enough for it to be completely believable when he does indeed go bad. His turn is honestly masked so well at the beginning. He's even quite noticeably kind to the kittens and Duchess, treating them gently when they walk on his face. It's quite sad in a way when we see him decide to kill them, because they obviously shared a real bond at some point, but Edgar's greed and his sense of insult at being forced to inherit the estate only after Madame and all of the cats have eventually died off ultimately overcomes any sense of affection he ever may have felt for the creatures. Roddy Maud Roxby, an English and Australian actor, gave his only ever voice performance as Edgar in this film, and I have to say that he did just a bang-up job of it. He's so unassuming in his villainous qualities, so endearingly comical and genuinely put upon that you actually start to feel bad for and sympathize with Edgar at times, such as in the scenes where he has to help the insane old George up the stairs, much to his own physical discomfort. Those are amazing, amazing business on the stairs. Edgar is, to me, one of Disney's most underrated villains of all time, and it's nice to just take this moment to give him a bit of his proper due. Also, as a final note, Roddy, who was born in 1930, is still with us, recently celebrating his 96th birthday on April 2nd, 2026. You the man, Roddy, you absolutely the man. Also, Roderick Maud Roxby is a kick-ass name.
Check this out.
I already discussed them a fair bit in the stereotypes section, but I really do love the gang of cats living in Paris, how they instantly come to Thomas' aid as soon as they hear that everyone else is in trouble, and just their entire general vibe as a group of characters. It's very funny to me, however, that among all these many cats, based on all these different cultural and national stereotypes, not a single one of them is a stereotypically French cat. So odd. You'd think that they'd have a little dude in a striped shirt and a beret called Pierre or something, or Jean, or Louis, smoking a cigarette with a long holder and playing an accordion. But alas, no. Alas, earwax.
Alas, earwax.
I'm extremely fond of both Madame and Georges. These two are such sweet old lovebirds. Such an adorable couple of aging oddballs who bring out the best and sweetest parts of each other's natures. I love the way they get so nostalgic together to the music of their youth, and how Georges insists on dancing with Madame. Physical limitations of age be damned. Madame especially is so wonderful a character, a true old cat lady through and through, and we totally understand why Duchess insists on returning to her mistress rather than abandoning her for a life on the streets with Thomas. Hermione Baddeley did splendid work in the part, and the role of Georges was voiced by Charles Lane, whom I know primarily for his work as a recurring player on I Love Lucy, showing up over and over as different random side characters that Lucy would run into in different situations. It's funny to me how most of the characters feature English accents, even though this story takes place in France. Madame, Georges, Edgar, and several of the animals all have either English or American twangs, and the closest we get to anyone sounding remotely French is Duchess, with Eva Gabor at the very least being Hungarian, and obviously speaking the English language with an accent foreign to it. Essentially, the only truly, authentically French voice we hear for the entire film is Maurice Chevalier during the opening song, which I will touch on a little more in the music section. For the dogs, two popular comedic TV actors of the time were cast, Pat Buttram and George Lindsay. Buttram would go on to be a new staple voice for Disney animation in the years to come, appearing in this film, Robin Hood, The Rescuers, and The Fox and the Hound. The two dogs, Napoleon and Lafayette, are one of the funniest Disney duos ever, and I love how they screw Edward up so hard every time they come into contact with him. They just have it out for this man and his nuts. They want to bite. These two are heroes. What good boys. That's all I have to say. I also must say I've got a lot more to say, I will say. That's not all I have to say, not by a long shot. These two remind me a lot of Delmar and Pete from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The two characters played by Tim Blake Nelson and John Turturro.
Come on in, boys. The water is fine.
I just love their dynamic so much, with Napoleon being bossy, controlling, and the braver of the two, who seems gruff at first, but ultimately seems to really love Lafayette, and Lafayette being the kinder, sweeter, and more timid, but ultimately more agreeable of the two, whose go-with-the-flow nature ultimately seems to be the element that makes the duo work so well together. They're kind of like flora and fauna if there was no Merryweather in the Three Good Fairies, because Napoleon is quite a bit like Flora, and Lafayette is very, very fauna-coded in basically every way. The gag of Napoleon constantly asserting his leadership, only to then take Lafayette's original suggestion as his own idea, had me dying laughing as a child, and I still think it's very, very funny. Also, the fact that there's an actual, legit meta-gag at the very end of the movie, with Napoleon insisting that the film cannot end until he says it's the end, is incredible, and is one of the very few actual fourth-wall breaks in Disney animation history. It's up there with Tamatoa, basically, or the Genie, or I don't know, a couple others. But it's crazy that Napoleon breaks the fourth wall. Perhaps he's magical in some way, because damn.
I'll say when it's the end. It's the end.
I must make special mention of how funny the milk van driver is in his brief appearance, and how he kind of reminds me of a French version of the English truck driver that we see beefing with Cruella in 101 Dalmatians. He even has one of the few attempts at an actual French accent in this entire movie. I don't think it was done by a Frenchman, but it's an attempt. Damn, I'm really glad they got Chevalier to do that song at the beginning, because if you did a whole movie about France with 0 French voices in it at all, then that's a little suspect, but they got one in, and the most legendary one of all. Similar to the dog voice actors being cast as a specific comedic pair, the geese Abigail and Amelia were cast with the voices of Monica Evans and Carol Shelley, 2 English actresses who had just originated the roles of the Pigeon Sisters in Neil Simon's play The Odd Couple, both in its original Broadway run in 1965 and in the film adaptation in 1968. Casting the two was an obvious nod to their previous roles together, and for their parts, they are absolutely hilarious here in this film, especially the way they continually insult Thomas O'Malley right to his face, and incessantly giggle at everything and everyone. Also, their theme tune is amazing. I love the music that goes with them waddling. It's perfect for a goose waddling. That music sounds like a goose walking. That's just what it sounds like. It's perfect. I have no idea how George Bruns did that, but he did. He captured the essence of a goose waddling down the road. Like, you just feel this way. Along with these 2 utterly silly goose sisters is their Uncle Waldo, voiced by the legendary Bill Thompson. Over the course of decades, Bill Thompson provided dozens upon dozens of voices for Disney animation, becoming one of their most recognizable, versatile, and important vocal assets of all time. He is remarkably funny here as Uncle Waldo, another character that made me die laughing as a child, with Thompson's delivery being the biggest part of that humor. His delivery in this role is just indescribably funny, and I always get excited for the Uncle Waldo part of this movie when it comes up. This would end up being his final film role, as Bill Thompson would pass away just 7 months after this movie's premiere. He also had this character called Wallace Wimple, that was like this sort of big wimpy dude who was very timid with the audiences, and I'm pretty sure that character was the inspiration for and like became Droopy Dog. Because I'm pretty sure Bill Thompson voiced that character, and that character was just based on a live-action character that he'd already been performing on stage and stuff and on the radio, and yeah, I'm fairly sure that's how Droopy Dog came into existence, was just through the character creation talents of Bill Thompson. Frou Frou is another big favorite side character of mine, especially her facial expressions when she realizes Edgar's treachery. She is actually one of only 2 named Disney horses ever to wear a hat, both of whom talk, the other being Cyril Proudbottom from The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, the Mr. Toad hat. He's Mr. Toad's horse companion, and he's amazing. But yeah, Frou Frou is a great horse too. I love Frou Frou. Nancy Culp is very charming in the role of Frou Frou. Any way you slice it, this is easily one of the best and most impressive voice casts of any Disney animated classic, even featuring the, by this point, certified silver-plated Disney legend Sterling Holloway himself as Roquefort the Mouse. Almost no other voice in history evokes Disney animation as completely and utterly as Sterling's does, and he's absolutely lovely once more here as the intrepid and insanely brave little mouse. Roquefort is literally always doing the absolute most to help Duchess and the kittens, and they would not have survived without his help. Also, the shot of him, like, passing out made me really sad as a kid for some reason. There's just like a sadness to him just falling asleep right at the entrance of his little mouse hole, and the way they color that scene, it just made me like, oh, shed a tear as a child. as well as being the end of the Walt years, with the death of Bill Thompson and the initial hiring of new staple Pat Buttram. This was at once the end of one era for Disney voice actors and also the start of a new one, with their long-time core of voices from the 1950s and 60s transitioning seamlessly into the new cast that they would rely on through the rest of the 1970s. And now, before we continue, it's time for a little smoke break.
So mild that you're bound to agree that camels suit you to a T, to a T.
Smoke camel and tea.
And we're back. This is one of Disney's original road trip narratives, where two or more characters have to traverse an unfamiliar landscape for much of the story before finally making it back home, having grown in some sort of important way. Similar to the impromptu journey taken by Duchess and the Kittens, other future road trip movies from Disney have included Home on the Range, The Emperor's New Groove, Brother Bear, Bolt, Moana, Moana 2, and probably a couple of others that I'm forgetting right now. It's a story structure they've enjoyed quite a bit over the decades, and it has often paid off quite brilliantly, as it does in this film. This movie is very much the cat version and midpoint, story-wise, between the studio's previous releases Lady and the Tramp and 101 Dalmatians, as I've already mentioned a couple of times in this script. The writers took what worked best out of those two previous stories, the romance of Lady and the cute animals in danger element of Dalmatians, and mixed them together with a few other original ideas to create this brand new storyline. I honestly love that this movie functions perfectly as a spiritual sequel to both of those earlier films. While it isn't the most groundbreaking tale of all time, it's cute and serves its purpose well, introducing Thomas O'Malley into the narrative at exactly the right moment to shake the dynamic up in an exciting and unpredictable way. Speaking of Thomas, this is one of Disney's best and most well-developed romances, and maybe their only one involving a mother of three. I love the moment where Thomas tells Duchess that her eyes really are like sapphires.
Your eyes are like sapphires.
This entire scene on the rooftop is the most pivotal as well as the most beautiful sequence in the entire film. Truly the very heart of the story, and it is played perfectly. It's melancholy and complex, with Thomas and Duchess making their love for each other clear, but Thomas unable to believe that Madame is indeed as wonderful a human as they claim, and with Duchess unwilling to abandon the person she considers her best friend, as well as essentially her mother. Their rooftop conversation, spied on by the kittens, is to me the very best scene in the entire movie. From a writing, complexity, and sheer visual beauty standpoint, as the entire thing washes over all five characters in the most gorgeous animated moonlight you've ever seen, all as they overlook the blissfully sleepy rooftops and architecture of one of the most storied and mythical cities in the history of the world. This is, in general, one of Disney's lowest stakes stories, and that's a good thing, as I find that the lower stakes and more relaxed feel let the story unfold naturally and fully breathe, only becoming truly hectic in the last few minutes. However, it does have its moments of danger, such as the train sequence where the cats barely escape with their lives, and which was a moment that genuinely terrified me and made me quite scared of trains and being caught on their tracks as a young child. If I was ever walking on the train tracks, I was always thinking about my way off of them in about 1 second flat, because this scene scared the shit out of me. Scared the bejeebus out of me, boy. Thomas saves Marie 3 different times, in fact, which was something I never noticed before my rewatches for this video. He does on the train, and he does putting her back in the cart. And there was another one, I can't remember where, but he saves her a third time anyway. It's just a sweet little extra connection those two characters share, and goes a long way, I'm sure, towards her mother falling for Thomas so fast and so hard. In addition to Elvira the maid being eventually dropped from the script, there was also in the original vision a storyline that was cut involving Duchess wanting to get her kittens ultimately adopted into new households, with each of their talents playing a role in this decision. The adoption aspect was ultimately axed, but the talents of each kitten remained on into the finished film. And I am so glad that they did cut it, because that sounds really stupid. I really like that the point of the movie is that they're all four trying to get back to Madame, rather than just whatever it is that she's trying to get them each adopted into different houses. I hate that. I love that the cats stay together in the end and add more cats. It's just, yeah, what a dumb storyline, in my opinion. I don't think that that would have worked, and I'm glad that they cut it. As a final note in this section, I want to touch on the storytelling done through Madame Adelaide Bonfamille's penchant for giving each cat she cares for their own unique form of neckwear to suit their personality. Duchess has her beautiful little bejeweled collar, and each of her children have colored ribbons. Toulouse with blue, Berlioz with red, and Marie with pink. And a little pink bow on her head. This trend then culminates in the final scene, with the picture being taken at the end of the entire cat family on the couch, showing Thomas in his new, respectable, stiff, white starched collar and green bow tie. And I think it really suits him too. He looks great with that. This one subtle change to Thomas' appearance perfectly symbolizes the fact that he has now finally found himself not only a permanent home to reside in, but a permanent family to share it with. The title track and opening credits number, The Aristocats, was written to evoke the feeling of Paris itself, and as soon as the Sherman brothers composed it, they immediately started saying how perfect Maurice Chevalier would be to sing it. Chevalier was at the time seen as one of the most prominent Frenchmen in the world, and essentially the voice of France. But he had recently retired, and they weren't sure if he would even consider the request. So, Richard Sherman did his best Maurice Chevalier impression, recorded a demo, sent it over to Maurice himself, and then waited with bated breath.
We knew right away that we wanted to have a French flavor for our songs, and in particular the title song, we wanted it to really set the mood and the style, and it told the story of the Aristocats. And the title song, of course, we kept saying, it's too bad Chevalier retired. He'd be perfect for this. He's Mr. Paris, but he had gone into retirement.
Well, Willie Reitherman, the director of the film, said, look, Dick, make a demo. The way you imitate him, make a demo of this song, and we'll get it to him.
And see, maybe he'll come out of retirement to do it. So I girded my loins, and again, I did my Chevalier imitation. Which pet's address is the finest in Paris? Which pets possess the longest pedigree? To which pets do the others tip their hats? Naturally, the Aristocats. Well, I did the whole song like that, and we sent it off to Chevalier. And happily, he came out of retirement, and the very last professional work he ever did, the last recording, was the soundtrack to our wonderful picture, Aristocats.
And he imitated Dick.
Immediately, Chevalier agreed to come out of retirement and record the song, and the Aristocats song ended up being the last piece of musical recording the legendary Maurice Chevalier would ever do in his over 60 years as a professional entertainer, as he would pass away just 13 months after the opening of this film, his final credit. The Aristocats became his very own swan song, signifying the end of an era in French music and pop culture, as well as in Disney animation. Scales and Arpeggios is probably my least favorite song in the movie by default, but even it is pretty good and is a cute showcase for Marie and her mischievous brothers, and introduces us to each of their unique characters pretty well. It's not the best song here by a long shot, but it's cute and it works for the overall scene that it's in. The Thomas O'Malley theme song is remarkably fun. It's got such a smooth swing to it, with Phil Harris delivering it just as gorgeously as he sang The Bare Necessities 3 years prior. This is an immaculate character introduction, his song and swagger instantly telling us exactly who Thomas O'Malley the Alley Cat is at his very core. By the end of this song, he has utterly entranced both us and Duchess with his gently confident demeanor. He's a well-practiced charmer, a forever bachelor, an inexorable old cat about town, and his song and entrance could genuinely be studied in university film courses for how effective of an introduction it is to his particular character. Of course, as far as full-on musical numbers go, there are few songs more beloved in the entire Disney canon than is Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. Sung by Scatman Crothers and then a little bit by several others, including an interlude from Eva Gabor, this song is no more or less than the entire soul of the film. The rooftop scene after it is the heart, but this song is the soul itself. It's a genuinely incredible piece of music, sung by an amazing vocalist, fit perfectly to suit the themes and energy of the whole story, and featuring some truly mind-melting visuals as a bonus. This song is absolutely everything it's cracked up to be, as even people who can't stand the rest of this film pretty much all agree that this one scene in particular is the highlight, and the quality of this song is the reason why. We don't talk about Scat Cat very often in the grand pantheon of Disney supporting characters, but he, like King Louis before him and Tamatoa after him, does get to sing the lead on one of the single greatest bops that Disney would ever set to animation, and that makes him very noteworthy indeed in my eyes. Yeah, go Scat Cat. George Bruns returned for the 5th of his grand run of 6 straight Disney animation scores, and he delivers one of his greatest achievements, boiling down everything he'd done with jazz and swing throughout the 1960s on the productions of 101 Dalmatians and The Jungle Book into his tightest, grooviest, most delicious soundtrack yet. Also, I should mention he was a jazz musician himself in the 40s, I believe, so a lot of his jazz influences in the 60s and 70s scores he did for Disney come from his experiences as a young man jazz musician when he was playing and not composing yet, or at least not composing for Disney yet. He also added in some French inspirations and instrumentations, such as some lovely usage of the musette in certain scenes. This French influence, paired with his jazz and swing sensibilities, matching perfectly with the flavor of the actual songs themselves, creates what I consider to be easily one of Disney's best-sounding movies from this period, or indeed any period of the company. It's just one of their best scores and soundtracks ever altogether. It's remarkably good. Seriously. While the Sherman Brothers had become and remained the main songwriting team for Disney animation throughout the 60s, many songwriters were given the task of coming up with potential songs for this movie, including Terry Gilkyson, Floyd Huddleston, and Al Rinker. You may remember Terry Gilkyson from having written I Want to Be Like You, the best track, in my opinion, from The Jungle Book. Many of these proposed numbers were cut, however, including a song each sung by Madame and Duchess, as well as a love duet between Edgar and the axed Elvira the Maid. In the end, the Sherman Brothers had the title track as well as scales and arpeggios chosen from their work, with Gilkyson contributing Thomas O'Malley's theme and Huddleston and Rinker combining to write Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. And honestly, of potential other things they could have included, I kind of wish that they had at least done some sort of a love duet between Thomas and Duchess. That would have been nice. Just a short thing on the... maybe, I don't know. Their conversation scene works so perfectly without music, but I do kind of think that it would have been nice for it to have a little bit of singing in it, especially like near the beginning, before they get into the harder parts of their conversation. But if they come out singing a little bit there, like after the madness of Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. That would have been nice. That would have been cool. A cool moment to have their voices mix. I like what Eva Gabor does get to do in the interlude of Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. It's a lovely sort of harp part that she sings over. I didn't like it as a kid. I love it now as an adult. It's really, really nice. I just think that would have been nice, and I do think something sung by Madame would have been nice. Maybe near the beginning, maybe even just a little bit of a small thing. What else? Oh, I do like the Tarara Boom D.E.A. I didn't discuss that, but Georges gets to sing a little bit of a song. He puts on some music. They dance, and it's one of my favorite Disney dances as well, between Georges and Madame Adelaide, now that we're sort of getting into the music and things. But, yeah, I wish that they maybe had added just a little bit more music. I love all the songs that they included. They were all necessary for this movie to feel like this movie, but I do think that it would have been nice. I don't think, Edgar really needed a song. If they'd had Elvira, I do think it would have been cool to have that song between Elvira and Edgar. I wonder what Elvira was going to be like. I can't remember the actresses, but I know that the original cast for Edgar, before it went to Roderick, was Boris Karloff, which would have been really cool. He had an incredible voice, obviously. He did The Grinch, after all. And his voice work is amazing in The Mummy. Just, obviously, he's on screen there too, but his voice is so resonant. Yeah, he would have been great. I love what Roderick does, obviously. He did perfectly for the Edgar that we got. But a Boris Karloff Edgar would have been intimidating, I feel. Like, really scary. Whereas Roderick makes Edgar quite likable at the beginning, and as do the animators. So his turn is more of a sad surprise and twist rather than like, oh yeah, this guy's going to be the villain from the very beginning. From the opening scene, you can't really tell that Edgar's going to be the villain, and I like that. It's a very early sort of Disney, not twist villain, but like surprise villain. And so, I mean, maybe if you're really good at detecting that sort of thing, but like he does seem to be a pretty lovely bloke in the first couple of scenes before he overhears the conversation. So yeah, I think Boris Karloff, I'm sure, I mean, he could have done it very likable, but I think he would have been really scary. So, would have been a different Edgar. Anyway, sadly for all of us, this movie was goodbye to the Sherman brothers at Disney Animation, as they were getting fed up with the constant turmoil and uncertainty in this period, and the overall direction the studio was taking after the death of Walt. Really, they were Walt's boys, some of his special favorites of all time. And without that relationship, they just weren't feeling the Disney brand any longer. And who can blame them? You know, I get it. They would not do any work for the company for the next 30 years, until at long last they agreed to provide songs for the Tigger movie in 2000. Never seen that, but now I kind of want to watch it. Listen to the songs. This was the fourth straight Disney animation production to be produced utilizing the xerography process, a method by which the original animator's own sketch work was translated pretty much directly onto the cells to be photographed alongside the end inks. This is a controversial animation technique, as it has historically been criticized by many, as it is still to this day criticized by many. And also, this is the movie where I would say it is the most noticeable, where they went the heaviest with just leaving guidelines in. There's a lot of times where you can fully just see like the head shape, the sketches, like the rough outlines of the animation that would eventually go on top of it. However, for me, this is the fourth film in a row in which I think the xerography is absolutely brilliantly used. In fact, in my opinion, this is the film in which the Xerox process looks its absolute best, achieving in it a wonderful visual comfortability, like a warm and fluffy blanket for your eyes. Yeah, I actually think that the heavier they went with the sketchy style of xerography, the better it looked, because just when you commit to something whole hog and you just say, all right, I'm going to do this heavy and the best version of this I possibly can, sometimes you shoot the moon and it works out and you make a masterpiece. And I think that this movie is pretty insanely beautiful. I know that that is a very hot take for some people. Some people think this is butt ugly. I think it's gorgeous. Eye of the beholder and all that. When the script was finally assigned to him by Walt to work on, on, Ken Anderson went full Bill Pete mode and spent the next 18 months developing the characters, look, feel, and overall visual style of the whole project. The character designs in this film are especially impressive to me, with their appearances perfectly representing and telegraphing their personalities in pretty much every single case. Except for Edgar, and that's on purpose. He looks nice at first, and seems nice to everyone, and then is secretly a bastard. Thomas O'Malley was initially supposed to have a striped design, until Wolfgang Reitherman pointed out what an absolute nightmare it had been to animate the stripes on Shere Khan, after which Thomas was simply drawn in solid orange. But yeah, you can see some of the original artwork for Thomas here, in which he is much more striped and also much more chonky. And look at this note that somebody left to Ollie Johnston here. It says, "Hey all." It's got some swearing on it. Why are you making Thomas a fat slob? Shit. I can't tell who wrote this note, but Lydia found this, and it's so funny. Apparently Ollie Johnston wanted Thomas to be fatter than he ended up being. He kept drawing him fat. Phil Harris wasn't like fat, but they wanted, I think Ollie wanted, at least by the appearance of this note, him to sort of more one-to-one represent Phil Harris physically like Baloo the bear had. And that makes sense, because Ollie and Frank Thomas had drawn a bunch of, pretty much all of Mowgli and Baloo together. And so he, I'm sure, had gotten quite used to drawing the Phil Harris voiced character in this body type. But Wolfgang really, that's probably a note written by Wolfgang Reitherman. But Wolfgang definitely wanted him to be, as he gave the note to Phil Harris, much more of a Clark Gable than a Wallace Beery, and so he wanted the Clark Gable body type as well, rather than the Wallace Beery body type. But God, this note is so funny, and it is just such a window into the communication between the animators. So thank you, Lydia, for finding this, because that really, really made me chuckle when I saw it in the Google Drive. Especially the little shit as emphasis. Just think of these middle-aged and older animators going shit to each other. It's just so funny. Like they're 15 years old. Come on, man, shit! In fact, all of Anderson's original character designs for the cats had to be toned down somewhat, as the overly detailed style that he had originally gone with was deemed too impractically expensive to produce for a full-length feature, with the designs all being a bit simplified to save on time and, more importantly, money. Stripes were removed, fluffiness was sort of just tamped down on a bit, the fur was a lot less detailed. This reminds me of the rejection of the original concept art for Alice in Wonderland, which was much more like the original Tenniel illustrations of the Carol book, but that Walt just thought it would be incredibly impractical and way too expensive to produce a full film in that particular art style. And then the closest he ever got to that was basically Sleeping Beauty, when he fully went in on the idea of animating a film as if it was sort of medieval illustrations and illuminations from old texts come to life. He pretty much did that almost one-to-one, and that movie was insanely expensive and did not make a profit at the box office. Even though it had a decent box office, it just cost so much damn money and took so long that Sleeping Beauty was kind of doomed from the start in terms of actually being a box office success. And so I think that just taught Walt many, many lessons. Obviously, he didn't make the decision to take down the character designs in this one because he was already passed away, but it's a very Walt-like move to do that, because that is pretty much exactly what he did for Alice in Wonderland before he eventually went with the more Mary Blair-inspired aesthetic that we eventually got in 1951. As well as Anderson and Reitherman being long-time Disney legends working on the film, many other old-timers did major animation work here, including 5 more of the 9 old men. Frank Thomas, who did the romantic rooftop scene in particular, and a lot of Duchess and Thomas animation alongside Ollie Johnston. And the rooftop scene was in fact the 3rd major romantic scene that Frank Thomas had drawn. after Mowgli and the Village Girl in 1967 in the Jungle Book, but even bigger was in 55 when Frank did the Lady and the Tramp eating spaghetti scene. Yeah, that was pretty much Frank Thomas's signature work, highlight of his entire animation career in terms of him and a lot of his peers. It's the most well-known scene that he drew ever from anything, I'm pretty sure, and just, pop culture-wise. And he was really trying to outdo himself here. He was basically trying to rival or surpass his own work with the rooftop scene visually between Thomas and Duchess. And I think he kind of gets there. It's not as iconic, certainly, as the Lady and the Tramp scene, but there is something equally as gorgeous about the rooftop scene in this. Frank did well. Of course, Frank's best friend, Ollie Johnston, did the Kittens and Duchess, and Thomas a little bit too. Lots of the cats, basically. And character development. He developed the designs largely, and just sort of in general, the visual aesthetic of the entire lineup. And this was a fun challenge, apparently, for Ollie Johnston, because he'd been a dog owner his whole life. And so he was really natural at drawing dogs, like they had to do in Dalmatians, and he and Frank had done the puppies, basically, together, and like he'd done in Lady and the Tramp. But he found, after studying the movements of cats for this film, that he was really, really good at doing cats too. And so he had a tremendous amount of fun with this. He loved the difference between the way that dogs move and the way cats move. And he based the personalities of the three kittens on three real siblings, three real children that he knew. I'm not sure who they were in his life, but he apparently based the dynamic of the three cats, especially the way that they tussle visually, on two brothers and a sister that he knew somehow. So I think that's fantastic. Maybe they were family members, but just I couldn't find that detail in my research, and who cares? Milt Kahl, our fiery friend from 101 Dalmatians, who complained so much about the erasing of his guidelines for Anita and Roger especially. Milt Kahl did, as was often his specialty in these sort of projects, the human characters. He worked on Edgar, Georges, and Madame, and he apparently used no reference at all for any of this. He used no reference footage, didn't look at anything, didn't look at his own hands, didn't look at nothing. He just drew it off the top of his head. And Milt Kahl, at this point in his career, was a little bit of a grumpy old man, and he basically said, if you can't go without reference, you're not a really experienced and skilled animator. He took it as a point of pride that at this point in his career, he did not need any reference. Whereas, a bunch of his colleagues were using reference for stuff. I feel like, I guess since he specialized in people and he would always draw people, it's not like sort of Ollie Johnston going from having drawn people and dogs before to having to draw cats, or like all of them having to learn to draw deers and rabbits and skunks and stuff and Bambi. But it's like, yeah, of course you can go without reference, Milt, if you're just drawing people. Not that that's not incredibly hard. And he did phenomenal work in this movie. He did some of his best work ever. As I say, the dancing between Georges and Madame is done by him, and it's phenomenal. The overall character design and movements of Georges are my favorite in the movie, and that's largely Milt Kahl. So I am complimenting this man. He was an absolute genius. But his attitude is a little bit holier than thou. I think it is okay to use reference, even if you're really experienced with something, just because you can always learn something. I think you can always learn something from reference. I use references constantly when I'm drawing and in my art, but I use a lot of different references for one picture. I put a lot of different things, and then some things I do draw off the top of my head, and those are often really fun too. But I'm obviously not an artist on the level of Milt Kahl or any of these wonderful men, but his attitude is funny to me. I'm not condemning it. It makes sense for the personality that I am discovering that Milt Kahl had through all my research. He was a firebrand. He just thought what he thought, and he said what he said, and he meant it. And I love that about him. And he was an enormous talent. But yeah, the you're not a really experienced animator if you're using reference. Maybe that wasn't exactly how he thought of it, but certainly for himself, he held himself to that standard. I don't want to put words in his mouth. It's just an interesting stance to take, and I thought I'd discuss it a little bit. Eric Larson, I don't have as much to say about, but Eric Larson did Roquefort. He was the one that I mentioned in the intro, though, was the guy who was going to stay on and teach the new generation of Disney animators the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
So Eric Larson just did Roquefort and some other things in this production, but he made a big decision here too, to be the mentor, to be the Yoda to the next generation, and to stick around.
No different. Only different in your mind.
And lastly, of all the 9 old men who were still on staff and doing big work in this period was John Lounsbury, who I don't think I've ever discussed on the channel before. I've never really mentioned his name, but he was a 9 old man, and he did the specifically Edgar and Georges sequences, including the business on the stairs. And wow, I'm not really super familiar with John Lounsbury. I'm sure he did incredible stuff in lots and lots of movies. I just haven't read as much about him, but my golly, did he do some funny things in this one. Just Edgar and George. Again, some of my favorite physical business in the entire movie. It is so hilarious. It is the suspenders. Oh my gosh. John, chef's kiss. Wow. I have to also mention how especially funny George's eyes look behind his glasses. And that's probably a Milt Kahl touch rather than a Lounsbury touch. George in particular, to me, has to be just one of the funniest looking characters in any movie. In any animated movie, he's just silly. He's just pure comedy to look at. He's so happy. He's so wobbly. He's so old. He's so old, and I love it so much.
But you're so old.
I was enormously impressed by the body, face, and hand animation for Edgar, especially when he is putting the sedatives in the cat's food, as well as when he is reacting to hearing Madame plan her will. Again, to think that Milt Kahl did all of that without reference at all is just utterly mind-boggling. It's hilarious that he had that stance, and it's a little bit snooty, but it is also so damn impressive. I love the way this movie looks on the whole. It has an all-time great aesthetic, so distinct and tactile and weighty and real feeling in every scene. Everything moves precisely how it should in this film. Objects, people, and especially animals. The animators made extensive study of the unique movements of cats and ended up translating this feline physicality pretty much perfectly to the screen in the final product. The vast experience of these long-time animators once again came in clutch in this production, not only with the character designs and movements, but also with how well the shots are planned out. The cinematography, as it pertains to the framing of each animal of different size, from horse to dog to cat and all the way down to mouse. The camera placement is always kept consistent with the POV of the character that we are meant to be following at that moment. And while that may sound like quite a simple concept, when it is applied consistently, it gives the film a wonderful visual fluidity and variety of shot selection. And that's something that you really kind of only get from a heck of a lot of experience of making movies just like this. Another little detail I love is the architecture and layout of Madame's house. It feels at once big and grand, but at the same time comfortable and truly lived in. A beautifully endearing setting for much of the beginning and end of the story. The house is very much like Madame Adelaide herself. Refined, aged, a little noticeably worn, but still so terrifically elegant and chic. A big aspect of this movie that works really well for me is the humor, especially the many silly sight gags. I've already talked a little bit at length about George and Edgar, but with Walt now not there to say no to anything, the animators could do pretty much whatever they wanted. They ultimately went pretty crazy with some of the more slapstick physical humor, especially, and I've already talked a little bit about George and Edgar on the stairs, but also specifically the stuff with the 2 dogs and Edgar, including the motorcycle under the bridge bit, Uncle Waldo's entire cameo, the pouring out of the wine, the business with Lafayette constantly stepping on his own ears, the singing party of cats and their piano falling chaotically through the different stories of the house until they reach the ground floor, as well as many more I could continue to list. It is a very funny movie. Speaking of that scene, I have to take a moment to praise the sheer visual madness that is the Everybody Wants to Be a Cat sequence, especially colors-wise. This is about as close as Disney animation has ever gotten to being truly psychedelic in its imagery, and in this sort of zany, jazzy, anything-goes adventure, it fits perfectly. And also, I have to say that when you think about the fact that this film was released in 1970 and would have been animated in and around the famous Summer of Love and late 1960s, and the sort of cannabis smoking and acid taking culture that was being popularized by people that were fans of the Beatles, I think that, yeah, the hippie culture wound its way into this film in a very interesting way visually, and I like that. This is definitely the most psychedelic they've gotten, at least since Pink Elephants in Dumbo, and that was almost 30 years old by this point. This is a movie largely built on cultural iconography, and has itself now passed into that same shared cultural and visual identity of both Disney and of the wider world. And I think that that is very beautiful. For the art style of this film to have fully completed the grand and time-honored historical artistic inspirational loop. I especially see the influence of the art of this film referenced in the graphics used for modern lo-fi and oldies music channels on YouTube, as the images on screen of sleepy bedrooms and cozy firelit mansions and quiet rainy city streets often have animals peacefully snoozing or wandering around in them. And if that animal is a cat, I have found that very often the cat depicted in these lo-fi and oldies music compilation channels is one of the cats from this film. It's usually Duchess, but sometimes others, or indeed multiples of the cats, and I just find it so lovely that this movie's art style and timeless character designs have taken on an entirely new life in the 2020s, as the silent, sleepy mascots for this most calming and relaxing genre of video. And now, before we move on to the Critics Roundup, it's time for a little message from the beyond.
Hey, Vern, look what I found in my daddy's closet. You know, I bet you this is from the big one. You know, WW2. You know, Vern, this must be some kind of a cigarette lighter. I know nothing. I see nothing.
And now it's time for the Critics Roundup, which is the part of these videos where I like to take a moment to read some of the thoughts and the overall rank within their Rank of the Disney Canon from a couple of dozen different reviewers from YouTube and online, either video rankings or article rankings for different websites. And in this video, I'm looking at 26 different rankings. I think it's about half and half for each, as well as the ranking and review of Lydia. And so, without further ado, let's get into those rankings and those brief thoughts now. Shea Frillis Productions, 35th, says it's simple and enjoyable, likes the two dogs, Edgar, Thomas O'Malley, and the main song. Yeah, we have a rare Edgar fan in Shea Frillis Productions. Heck yeah, man, I agree. Sean Chandler, 51st, says nothing stands out and it's underwhelming. I will say I really like how fair Sean Chandler is, even to the movies he doesn't really like. He still doesn't trash them verbally, unless he really hates them, but no, he's a fair-minded guy. I always enjoy watching him. Dave Lee Down Under, 32nd, calls it surprisingly good and better than its era in general. Says it has a great cast and energy. I agree, Dave. L.S. Mark, 38th, calls it shit. Yeah. Says he gets nothing out of it, hates the look of xerography. He complains about the nostalgia critic getting the plot of this movie wrong, and then immediately makes a comment about how this movie is over an hour and a half long. Like, he says something about one scene, and then it says, and it doesn't do anything for the other hour and a half of runtime. It's like, okay, so the movie's over 90 minutes. It's a 78-minute movie. Like, it's not that long. He just, like, he complains about the nostalgia critic getting a basic fact about the movie wrong, and then gets a basic fact about the movie wrong. Maybe for comedic effect, but it's not really clear. It's just if it is a joke, it's a bad joke, and if it's not a joke, then it's an inaccuracy after you just complained about an inaccuracy. So does accuracy matter or doesn't it? LS Mark, I might drop him from the critics roundup. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't like his opinions or whatever, like his rank is whatever, but he's just kind of a bad and annoying YouTuber. I don't really like being, I don't know, that critical of other people directly, but he's just not a very good YouTuber, to be perfectly honest. I think he's just a potty mouth and a bit of a hypocrite, and just he just kind of gets by on shock value and hot takes, and he does these long videos ranking stuff, and, you know, I'm sure he's passionate about what he's talking about. I just don't really like the way he talks about it. I find him to be sort of irritating and not very eloquent. He relies way too much on swear words and just kind of trashing stuff. And it's like, if you're calling the 38th best, in your opinion, Disney animation movie ever shit, and there's 60 plus of them now, and the 38th is shit to you, I don't think you really like Disney animation very much, which you don't really have to love Disney animation to rank the movies, but it's a window into how he views the canon, that he would call his 38th ranked one out of 60 plus shit. You can't be that fond of Disney animation on the whole and think that 20 plus of them are just garbage. You really can't. So anyway, I've said that word too much. I promised my mom that I would stop swearing in videos, but I was mostly quoting him. Anyway, I don't like how much he swears either. You can swear if you want, but I just find it unclassy in videos. For the most part, and it also robs it of impact when you actually do it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll keep him in the critics roundup, but I don't know. He kind of sucks. His videos are kind of bad. Brian Hull, 44th, says it's fine and serves its purpose, and that he likes Phil Harris a lot. Says Edgar is slightly underrated as a villain. Another Edgar fan. And this is another thing I'll say, right, is that I really like Brian Hull. He's a really great YouTuber with a lot of wonderful energy, and he just brings so much charm and charisma to every video, in contrast to the last fellow that I was just talking about. And he's got this movie ranked 44th out of 60 plus. And he says it's overall fine and serves its purpose, whereas LS Mark has it ranked 6 spots higher and calls it, awful. So it's interesting. It really shows how much bigger a fan of the canon one person is versus the other. The Trove, 58th, says that while Everybody Wants to Be a Cat is a great song and Duchess and Thomas are good characters, he thinks it has some of the worst animation in the Disney canon. Yikes. Modern Mouse, 39th, says that it's not super historically significant, but is still pretty good. The 90s Kid, 34th, says that it's good and solid, and that Everybody Wants to Be a Cat is really fun. The 90s Kid is another one of my favorite ranks. A lot of these are my favorite ranks. Honestly, I dislike very, very few of them as videos. But I'm just starting to turn on the LS Mark one as I watch the sections more and more. Justin Watches Movies, 48th, says that while it's good looking and the characters and music are good, that it doesn't do much for him and leaves him wanting more. The Glad in Gladiator, 42nd. No specific comments. He just kind of ranked it and moved on. Maple Street Movies, 11th, says that he loves cats and that this movie is very nostalgic for him, that he especially loves the painting scene. The Movie Geek, 52nd. That was all of the YouTube video ranks, and now we are moving on to the online article Ranks Plus Lydia. Collider, 47th, says that the vocal performances and music are great, but that the story just feels like a lesser version of 101 Dalmatians. Paste Magazine, 49th, says that it is both entertaining as well as morally educational and worthwhile. Slash Film, 54th, says that it just feels to them like an inferior retread of both The Jungle Book and Lady and the Tramp, calls it dreary and boring. Hollywood.com, 17th, says that it is Disney's celebration of hipster culture, a tribute to the joys, plights, lingo, and most of all, music of a certain class of people who know that they're better precisely because they're worse. What a weird review. That is a really weird blurb, I have to say. That is one of the oddest blurbs, especially for an overall positive ranking and mini review, that I've ever seen in any of these ranks. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of placements and mini reviews on them. That was a bizarre thing for Hollywood.com to write. I get what they're saying. It's just a weird sentiment, especially about a film that you rank 17th all time. Gave me pause, but whatever. It's a cool list. Screen Rant, 48th, says that it and its music are unique within the canon. My SF Reviews, 32nd. Metacritic, 41st, and they for some reason say that the film was only modestly successful at the box office. Okay then. Somebody at Metacritic failed to do their research when writing the article portion of that ranking, because this movie made 7 times its budget, $28 million, and set a new record for all-time box office for an animated film. So, modestly successful is a wild inaccuracy. Moving on. Cinema Blend, 61st, says that the plot is nonsensical and that Edgar is a useless villain. The Playlist, 31st, says that it suffers a little by being too close to the standard Disney formula of the time, but that it is still entertaining. Unshaved Mouse, 58th, and I don't care to quote their mini review because it's hacky and dumb. I don't even remember what it is now, but I didn't like it. It's another kind of stupid line, even dumber than the Hollywood.com line. The Hollywood.com line is just weird. Yeah, but the Unshaved Mouse portion on that is genuinely stupid. It's I don't actually get critical of these critics often, but I think criticism can be critiqued too. I think you can get in a little bit of a weird, endless snake eating its tail loop about that. But I do think that videos such as mine that review movies can be reviewed themselves and discussed themselves as their own unique pieces of art, because this is a piece of writing, just as the movie I'm talking about is a piece of writing and video production and anything. So I don't know. I think that it's fair for people to criticize my videos, and it's fair for me to have opinions about the Critics Roundup. But moving on. I know I've just been very, very vocal about it today, but I'm in a mood. Feeling Animated, 44th, says that it's not particularly memorable in any one specific area, but that it has an immaculate vibe and is fun to just put on in the background of your day. Darth Docking on Reddit, 20th. Rolling Stone, 35th, says that while it isn't perfect and is at times a bit thin, it's just so much fun overall that its merits totally make up for the ways in which it lacks. And finally, Lydia.
Lydia, oh Lydia.
19th, says that the scratchy animation actually really works in this film's favor, the kittens are adorable, and the music is infectious. Truly, everybody wants to be a cat. Cat emoji. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with that review. Yes, well, Lydia and my opinions tend to be pretty close. 26 reviews with an average ranking of just 40th overall. Exactly 40th, in fact. According to the collective Critics Roundup average, putting it 14th out of 20 so far in our big ranking of the collective Critics Roundup average. It was in 0 rankers top 10, with a highest ranking of 11th and a lowest ranking of 61st. So obviously no first or last place placements either. Yeah, it didn't do great in our overall rank. It came in above only 5 of the 6 package era films and The Sword and the Stone. But you can't win them all. And I have to say, I'm impressed with how much and how well Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Pinocchio are holding the line strong at the 1, 2, and 3 spots. After all this time, nothing from any era has managed to surpass either of those films from the Golden Age, except for Sleeping Beauty, just a little bit over Pinocchio in its average rank. And then, yeah, Snow White is still number 1. I wonder what the first movie to knock Snow White out of first place with its average rank from the Critics' Roundup is going to be. I would hazard, I guess, that it's going to be Little Mermaid. I don't think anything before that is as beloved or as respected overall as Snow White. But I do think that The Little Mermaid is going to beat it. But we'll see. I haven't done the averages for all of the other movies yet, so we discover it as we go along, and I kind of enjoy that aspect of each Critics' Roundup at the end. Moving on. The Aristocats 1970 is many, many things. Adorable, energetic, hilarious, cheaply stylish, effortlessly cool, very French, and ultimately quite underrated, especially with the utterly choice voice acting and the astonishingly great, classic as all heck music. It's a movie by great artists, for artists, and partially about art itself, especially in the musical sequences. It's about the corruptive nature of greed and selfishness too, shown in Edgar's slip from respectable man with a good job to utterly contemptible attempted animal murderer. He's not one of the most powerful villains in the canon, but he is one of the most psychologically fascinating and detestable to me, and I think he illustrates a perfect self-loving yin to Madame Bonfamille's cat-loving yang. However, the biggest theme in this movie by far are those pertaining to the importance of family and of fatherhood.
There's always room for family.
Duchess, the kittens, and Madame herself are all at a complete and utter loss when they are parted, and are all desperate to get back to each other as soon as they possibly can. Not to mention Roquefort and Frou-Frou. They miss their kittens too, they're part of the family. The city cats, meanwhile, seem to have found their own unique form of family, hanging out, living, and playing music together every day, each member looking out for the group as a whole. Abigail and Amelia are 2 sister geese on a mission to visit their Uncle Waldo, and so we see another smaller family reunion within their part of the story before the bigger one at the end. Even the 2 dogs have what is very clearly an extremely close, brother-like bond between them. Madame Bonfamille as well and Georges clearly share some sort of a deep bond, whether it be purely romantic or some sort of actual form of something visual in their younger lives, or just, an old lavender thing, as it might be. But whatever Georges and Madame have, it is sweet, and of course her last name literally means good family in French. So that's cute, and I think that's the theme of the film wrapped up in one word, Bonfamille. I'll have to look up what Adelaide means. Maybe that has some sort of significant meaning as well for her first name, but yeah, Bonfamille. It's a nice name to say, a nice word. Thomas O'Malley, then, represents these themes the most directly, as his arc centers entirely around the concept that he might in fact be happier settling down with Duchess and the kittens than he ever has been wandering the road alone. He has, of course, enjoyed his years as a totally carefree troubadour, but in meeting Duchess and her children, he is shown just how wonderful it can be to join a family unit, take on real responsibility, be a father figure to someone, care for others more than yourself, and finally settle down to a life of quiet domestic bliss. It's a beautiful story, told in a beautiful way, and I love it now almost as much as I did when I was a very young child. 9 out of 10. And I had this a couple of years ago at an 8, and then I had changed it to an 8.5, and then after this very last rewatch, before the fully completion of this script, I gave it a 9. I really do think it's that damn good. And that's all I have for you today. Next week, or month, or something like that, we'll be back discussing 1973's Robin Hood, a big favorite of a lot of people, especially a lot of people of a certain persuasion. So please do join us again for that. Thank you ever so much for watching, and if you're still here, bonne nuit, bonne chance, and enjoy the afterword.